Welcome to the Up Arrow Podcast with William Harris, featuring top business leaders sharing strategies and resources to get to the next level. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everybody, William Harris here. I'm the founder and CEO of Element and the host of this podcast where I feature experts in the D2C industry sharing strategies on how to scale your business and achieve your goals. I'm really excited about the guest that I have today, Darren Marshall. Darren is the CEO of Steven Smith Teamaker, an integrated omnichannel tea company based in Portland, Oregon. Smith's mission to enrich lives through exceptional tea experiences is enabled by its head, heart, and hustle culture, which earned its place on the Inc. 5000. Darren has deep international leadership experience building consumer brands ranging from Pantene to Coca-Cola to my favorite here, Steinway Sons, which I want to bring up a little bit later on. Darren, I'm excited to have you on the show today.
William, it's such a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And I believe, if I remember correctly, Yarden Shaked, the founder over at Veros, is the one who introduced us. So thank you, Yarden, for introducing us. I want to bring something up about maybe Veros a little bit later on as well.
Yarden and Shock, and sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
No. Yarden and Veros are awesome. Such a great platform, and it's been super helpful in driving our e-commerce business. I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit later.
100%. Yes, I want to at least dig in a little bit there. Before we get into the meat and potatoes, in the bulk of what we want to talk about today was just the idea of bringing growth to an old, stale category through innovation, grit, and agility is the way you worded it. And I love that. And I think there's some stuff that we can get into there from an omnichannel perspective. Before we do, I at least want to call out the sponsor here. This episode is brought to you by Element. Element is an award-winning advertising agency optimizing e-commerce campaigns around profit. In fact, we've helped 13 of our customers get acquired, with the largest one selling for nearly $800 million. We had one that recently IPO'd, and we were ranked as the 12th fastest growing agency in the world by Adweek. You can learn more on our website at element.com, ELUMYNT.com. That said, enough of the boring stuff, on to the fun stuff. Darren, tell me about your backstory of how you ended up coming to be the CEO of Smith Tea Company and what brought you to where you are today.
Who would have known? Things happen and things evolve, and being agile and flexible through life has been very interesting. I grew up in Winnipeg, just a little bit north of you in Canada, in the cold prairies. I was really into music when I was a kid, and that sort of allowed me to adventure a little bit. I went to college and on a piano scholarship, and nice. Enjoyed that. Realized that there's a lot of really gifted musicians in the world, and demand not so much. So diversified a little bit. I was always interested in math and economics and business and stuff like that. So eventually ended up in business school and then at Procter & Gamble. I was really interested in brands and consumers and how people made choices about what brands they would represent or would represent them. P&G to the US, then to PepsiCo, and then to Coke. When the recruiter called me about Coke, they said, you have some interesting international experience. Was that something you would be interested in pursuing? And I said, yeah, for sure. Thinking London, Paris, maybe Brussels.
Sure.
And they said, yeah, how about Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia? So in 1998, ended up in Kuala Lumpur with my family. We were there for just a couple of weeks, and then the economy completely crashed, which was a very interesting period in life. It didn't kill us though. So from Malaysia to Singapore to Thailand to Hong Kong, over the course of just more than a decade, which was super interesting. Lots of interesting things to talk about. Then back to the U.S. Still was working for Coke and sort of grew up in the sort of the global marketing commercial world. Got interested and involved in the private equity part of that business, buying and selling small beverage companies, which then led to leaving Coke and joining Steinway Sons when it was acquired by Paulson and Company. And helped to transform and grow that business, getting it ready for acquisition and potentially an IPO. And when that didn't happen, left and went to Smith Teamaker. And I've been here for about 5.5 years. Been a really interesting time. Lots of things have happened, but an interesting career journey when I wouldn't have changed one thing about it.
Well, and I love it. I think that's one of the things that you called out is being willing, in business, you have to be willing to pivot, but even in your career, you have to be willing to pivot and looking at, okay, well, what is life presenting to you right now at this opportunity? And is it something that you can say yes to? And if you can, sometimes there's some really great opportunities that are around the corner that you could never even imagine planning for. You just have to kind of take it and go with it.
100%. And it goes to, I think, your interest in change, your influence, your interest in evolving, risk-taking, all of those things. There's a lot of people, in fact, I would argue most human beings, they die 10 miles from where they were born, and their roots are deep. In the expat world, there's a lot of debate between, do you give your kids roots or do you give them wings? And we chose wings. And it's something we've used ourselves, and my daughter uses on a regular basis.
That's really cool. I like that. Roots versus wings. And like I said, I called out the Steinway Sons one as being one that I'm particularly, I was like, oh, when I saw that, I was like, this is cool. I love this because I'm a musician as well. And you were talking about, your early career path of there's a lot of musicians out there and not as much opportunity. My goal originally was I wanted to be a rock star. And my mom wisely said, that's not a career path. I did have a band in high school at the time. We were doing really well. And but my mom was like, you got to get a degree in something other than, being a rock star. And that led me towards, a whole series of things where, I've got my own situation where it's like I ended up taking nursing then because I could work 3 days a week, have 4 days a week. So I could still, do the band thing, and then transition eventually to marketing as well. And so, this idea of starting down one path, but being open to what life, puts in front of you, I think is one of the best ways to be able to just chase a lot of different dreams and chase some really fun, interesting experiences as well. But so the Steinway Sons though, so, what was your favorite part about being at Steinway Sons? Again, as a musician, was it kind of like a little kid in a candy shop? I feel like anytime I see a piano, I have to sit down and play with it. Were you actually able to get work done?
Yeah, it's Steinway is a really interesting place to be, and I'm really glad that I was there. A lot of people outside of the music industry were like, "Why are you doing that? Like that has nothing to do with your background." And I'd argue not quite the case, but for people who understand music or culture or luxury, it was a really, really cool place to be. There were a couple of things that I really enjoyed about it. Like you are right in the center of art at its highest form. So the number of artists, current and past, who are like in your building on a regular basis is really, really cool. You think about the history of the old Steinway building, which isn't there anymore, but Rachmaninoff was in the basement practicing on his first trip to America, going to Carnegie Hall. So all of these legends have used your space in one way or another. And then the current legends, from Yuja Wang to Billy Joel to Jean Baptiste to whoever it might be, like all of these people are like in your space all of the time. So if you're interested in that sort of environment, then it's pretty cool. It's sort of like working at Nike, I guess, in some ways.
Sure.
And then there's the craft. I mean, the factory is just fantastic. So taking these amazing pieces of wood, super highly selective from certain regions that are on certain mountains that have wind from certain areas, so that they build a certain, they grow with a certain amount of resonance and strength and everything else.
Interesting.
Taking those trees, drying them for 2 years and turning them into 100,000 pieces, which are then crafted by hand into a piece of art, which is intended to last several lifetimes. It's pretty cool. It's really, cool. Really interesting to see how that transformation happens and the craftsmanship which goes into a $100,000 piece of musical history.
Yeah. Now, see, that's something I didn't realize about even the selection of the wood, looking at the wind that made it up. But I can somewhat understand that now a little bit. My wife likes to garden, and in Minnesota, obviously, we have to start our seeds indoors because it's too cold for us to plant right away. And so we have a fan that we blow on the plants as they're growing in the basement. Because you need that in order for it to build up the right strength. Otherwise, when you eventually take it and transplant it outside, it's just going to, keel over and die. And so that's interesting to like you said, that's a part of the factor that you guys even looked at for the wood that you're sourcing to make sure that it's strong enough, which is an interesting allegory into just business and life in general. That if you just put, going back to the wings versus roots, if you just put your kids into an environment where they're not challenged, they're not going to develop the resilience that they need to be able to be successful in the world. And so that's 100%. A really interesting corollary.
Yeah, definitely. Challenge and struggle, I think, is when I look back on my career, which is crazy that it's 30 years now, but it's the challenges, it's the mistakes, it's the screw-ups, and then fixing the screw-ups. Those are the things that have left a lasting impact. Those are the things that I think make me not only better at what I do, but also make me a little bit more interesting. Having messed up enough times to be able to know what not to do, while having enough curiosity to discover things that maybe you haven't done yet.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I want to dig into marginal CAC, but before I do, I also want to hear a little bit about Smith Teamaker. And for those who are maybe not familiar with it before, give me like a little bit of a spiel about it, specifically on the idea of what drew you to that particular brand of tea makers?
Yeah, so the tea category is the second largest beverage category in the world after water.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
There's a lot of very large cultures in our world where tea is the primary beverage. So having worked in the beverage industry internationally, I had a different understanding of what tea could be than others who maybe didn't have that exposure. So the tea category in America is pretty big. It's a couple $1 billion, but it's old, it's flat, it's traditional, it's a little stale. There's not a lot of innovation that is going on. So the Smith story actually started many years ago. So Steven Smith, our founder, came back from military service in the 70s. He grew up here in Portland, and he was working at a natural food store. And he had fond memories of his grandmother and them sharing red rose tea, that sort of thing, together. So he was working at this natural food store, and they had accidentally got a overshipment of peppermint. And so he and a couple of buddies said, hey, we'll take that. And they loaded up their VW Love Bus, I presume, and started driving up and down the coast selling peppermint. And that turned into Stash Tea, which was founded in 1973, I guess. They grew that business, worked on it for a couple of decades, sold it to a Japanese company, and thought they'd retire. And then Steve said to himself after a couple of months, I'm bored, and he said, the world doesn't just need a better tea. The world needs a brand that could inspire. So what if Merlin the Magician met Marco Polo? What would they do together? And that was literally the brief for Tazo, which was founded in 1993. So that business also grew. It was very innovative and very different, very interesting. Starbucks, who was up the street, got interested and bought the business. Steve and the team stayed on for several years and grew that to a very significant business proposition. He then retired in 2008. The family retired to the south of France, and they got bored yet again. So Steve was walking through Saturday markets in Avignon or something romantic like that. The smell of the lavender is in the air, and the perfumes and the great soaps, and the great sausages and great wines and all of these very handcrafted things. And so he said, the world doesn't just need a better tea. The world doesn't just need a brand, but this notion of artisanal, handmade, very special, the stuff that I would want to drink. Nobody's doing that. And I should. So Steven Smith Teamaker was founded in 2009. Business grew. Steve unfortunately passed away. In 2015, a private equity firm got involved. I got involved shortly thereafter. And there we are today. Today, our business has done pretty well. We've just more than tripled the size of the business in the last 5 years. It's a very different consumer goods product company. In that half of our business is direct to consumer, half of is wholesale. We've been able to do quite well through the last couple of years, all of which have been pretty turbulent. And it really comes down to being agile on channels, really finding opportunities when some doors close. How do you open others? It's about being agile on products and really being able to innovate and find new reasons for people to engage in your product, in your category. And having an infrastructure that allows for agility. So that goes down to part of it is culture and how do you shape a culture. And part of it is how do you make sure that you're not depending upon too many others. So having an integrated operation has been a huge competitive advantage for us and has enabled that flexibility to be able to move as the market moves. So that's the Smith story.
No, and that's good. And one of the things that you said here that I really held on to is the omni-channel balance there that you were talking about of, half being wholesale, half being D2C. That is unique. I feel like there's usually one where it's 90-10 or something. There's usually one that you're overly indexed in. How did you come about that being the right balance for you guys, and how do you maintain that balance? How do you know if that's the right balance or where you're moving things into?
Yeah, a part of it is planned and part of it is responsive. As we were going into 2020, the first quarter of 2020 was actually the first 8 weeks of 2020 were great.
Sure.
70% of our business at that stage was in food service, hotels, restaurants, cafes, that sort of thing. And then we had hobbies in other areas. And then promptly, most of that 70% of our business disappeared in mid-March of 2020. So we had to, if we wanted to stay in existence, if we wanted to support at that point, 50 or 60 teamakers that were part of our business, then we had to do something different and do it fast and do it well.
Yeah.
And we had an e-commerce business, but it's not something that we spent a lot of time and certainly didn't invest a lot of money or effort in. And we had to. So in the middle of March, we had been working to evolve our user experience. And we were getting ready to sort of relaunch some things. So we were able to have a platform that made sense. And basically we took our PPP money, whatever that stands for, I can't remember, and invested all of it in acquisition media. It's sort of going to Vegas and betting everything, the farm, on Bet 9. And that's what we did. And thankfully, we had, there's other components to all of this, but we had the right product, the right time. People were at home. They were looking for something that was healthy and refreshing. The weather happened to be super nice at that point. We had an amazing iced tea proposition that no one else had. Nice. And things just took off. And thankfully, we were able to actually grow our business double digits in 2020. And then when our food service business came back, it was that much stronger because our awareness had grown nationally at a really healthy clip. So that adversity actually turned into the biggest blessing and growth driver of our business ever.
Sure.
And we were able to not only completely recover that food service business, add on a very significant e-commerce business. Wow. And now both of them are growing, 30, 40%, continued. And now it's a couple of years after that time. So it's we're very fortunate, and it's gone to agility, to being to making a bunch of mistakes, learning from those, and getting better every day.
Well, and it sounds like, you being the right guy for the job in a situation like this, because you even explained about how you went from country to country to country, and you saw, the .com bust economy. You saw, the other recession that we had in 2008. And so, you kind of have been through a few of these things to know how to be adaptable in your career and in your personal life. And so now it's a matter of, okay, we've got this opportunity. Here's what's right in front of us. We're sitting here, and here's what's happening. How do we be, let's just say, nimble with being able to make, or at least even say willing to make those changes? But being willing to make the changes and actually being able to, like you said, be agile enough to make those changes are two very different things. And I think there's a lot of other companies that maybe saw the writing in the wall, but weren't able to make those changes. And you called out this agility. How did you set the company up in a way to where you could actually execute on those thoughts and ideas?
Yeah, good question. I think it goes to two things. One is culture. So we've been able to refine and define our culture in a way that makes sense. We looked at the people on our team who just really fit well, who did who we'd love to be able to replicate people like X, Y, and Z. And what was the common element through that? And it really came down to three things: head, heart, and hustle. Being able to not be a rocket scientist, but to think logically, to think calmly, to apply discipline, to just be logical in what you're doing, using data where you can. Heart, caring about what we do, caring about our consumers and customers who buy our product, caring about each other, and being able to work together and collaborate. That's not unique. Or it is unique rather. And then third is hustle, just getting shit done, being able to move things forward no matter what. It's interesting, just the importance for a smaller business like ours, the ability to execute and to depend on people who can get things done. It's really, really important. So the whole notion of being able to weed out the people who were not really consistent with that culture, getting them off the bus, as it were, from a good to great standpoint, and filling that bus with people who were, ready to fight, the people you want to have in the trenches, the people who are going to roll up their sleeves so that you can depend upon. So that was one. The second is really leaning into integrated production and having flexible production. So particularly in the private equity world, there's certainly was an awful lot of focus. The private equity playbook was, outsource everything so you keep your capital investment super low and put it on somebody else's books.
Sure.
Which could work financially, but then you've got you don't have any flexibility on inventory. You don't have any flexibility on quality. Innovation is long and burdensome because you've got to depend upon someone else. And you just need a lot of upfront cash to be able to move it forward. So a lot of our competitors who were working within that model had all kinds of inventory that they couldn't sell because their customers had basically shut down during the pandemic. Whereas we were able to we had raw tea. How do we package it in a way that can be sold through the channels that are still active? And not everyone had that ability to do it. We did, and we took advantage of it. And part of it, I guess, also was there was a fear of failure. I wasn't going to fail, and if we didn't do something, then you are automatically failing. And we weren't going to let that, I wasn't going to let that happen. So we did whatever it took.
I like that you said, one of the things I like to ask people oftentimes is like, what do you fear? But I like that you brought up this idea of this fear of failure, because I would say that resonates with just about every single person I've ever had on the podcast. More or less, the fear is on, I don't want this to fail. And I even had somebody on, and I'm trying to remember who it was. Jess Chan talked about how it's like she doesn't want this fear of unmet potential or whatever, where it's like, on her, tombstone or something, if it says like, hey, here's Jess Chan, she had so much potential that she didn't use or whatever, right? It's this idea of this fear of failure. But I like that you brought this back to not just like fear of failure being like, how do you define failure? And you define it as just like doing nothing. And I think that's the key, right? Where if you could look at it and saying like doing something means that you're not failing. You might do something that doesn't work, but you've done something that you've learned now. And so that's not a failure. That's a point along the growth path. And I think that's key.
Yeah. And, you may need to, you take 3 steps forward and you might need to take 2 back, because you realize that, that's a dead end, but you're still net up 1. And even if you're net down, you still realize that, okay, well, there are landmines, over that ridge and I've got to go in a different direction. So yeah, doing nothing is guaranteed failure. Doing something and experimenting and learning quick, failing quick, changing super quick is just necessary.
Yeah. Something else that you brought up when we talked the last time was marginal CAC. And I feel like that's a term that not enough people use when they're talking about being able to be, really nimble and wise and about how they're growing things. But when you talk about marginal CAC, what are you looking at there?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we've gone from spending nothing on e-commerce to investing millions of dollars in digital media, and it's not a straight line.
Sure.
There's a an investor might look at this, particularly ones who don't have deep experience, and say, hey, well, it's arithmetic, right? Like if you want to 10x your business, then let's 10x the investment. And it just doesn't work that way, particularly in a changing environment like iOS 14 that all of us know about. So it's interesting. One of the things that everybody manages their digital media in one way or another. One of the ways that we've looked at this is we've got routines in place where our CFO, myself, and our e-commerce team get together every week to be able to understand the fruits of our labor. We invested this much last week, and here's what it has yielded. And it's interesting when you look at those weekly investments over many years, and you plot them. It's really fascinating to look at the differences, and it's not a straight line. It's a line of diminishing returns. And what we've learned from that is there are when you invest more than X, then you're not going to get as much back. And when you so there's sweet spots along that pathway as you're investing, and you've got to be able to know when you can put on the gas, but when you really need to take on the brakes. And there are other certain factors that start driving within that. In some cases, it's new product innovations or new advertising campaigns that you might use, or certain seasonality elements. It all changes it. But knowing that there's a diminishing marginal return to your investment, and knowing where that sweet spot is and how it changes on a regular basis is just, it's so important, I think, to have a super detailed finger on the pulse of your business, particularly in a business where how you invest your e-commerce media can make or break the business, the total business. So anyway, that's how we think about marginal CAC and why it's important.
Well, and I think to your point, one of the things that's really interesting about this is there are sweet spots, and you're either if you're not looking at it from a marginal CAC perspective, you're either underspending or overspending, and you're not sure which one it is. But it's, for lack of a better idea, it's like a gasoline engine. You've either got too much fuel or too much air, and you're not getting the right combustion that you need for this to be the highest performing machine that it can be. And that's going to, ruin the engine, or it's going to do damage at some point in time along the way if you don't get that under control. And I feel like I've seen a lot of businesses where we come in and they're just wildly on one side or another, but they're still looking at CAC very flatly, right? They're just looking at it as just this single number instead of understanding the nuances there. So I think that the wisdom there is just realizing that there have to be nuances, and you need to at least know what those are.
Yeah. It's interesting. Our marketing head sent me a really interesting article about a DTC company that just recently declared bankruptcy, and one that I had known, and perhaps you would as well. And it hit me that they were complaining about all of these factors. Facebook changed and the market changed and blah 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 blah. Our CAC is actually lower now than it was 4 years ago, and it's gone up and down. It's about half of what it was last year, and that's because, like, last year we thought it was a straight line, and we thought we'd throw a bunch of money early in the year, and it didn't work. It really didn't work, and it put us back. But being able to look at it super granularly and finding those sweet spots of knowing when to be strategic about when to hit the gas really, really makes a difference. And being able to not spend on investment and thinking about it even from a business standpoint, thinking about it from a contribution basis as opposed to a pure revenue growth basis, really makes a huge difference. And being able to drive for profit as opposed to dollar growth.
Well, one of the things that you said, and I'm not a race car driver, so this might be a horrible analogy, but I think I'll get the rough idea here, is knowing when to hit the gas versus the brakes. And so let's say that you're about to go around a corner, a turn. That's not the time when you hit the gas, right? It's like, well, you might need to tap the brakes a little bit, but you do want to accelerate out of the turn, from what I understand. You don't want to wait until you're all the way on the straightaway before you hit the gas. And I feel like that's what businesses miss. And one of the ways that we help to try to navigate that is by looking at broader economic things that are going on, as well as your specific like macro demand coefficients. And so a simple way of looking at this would be, let's just even say right now, tea at home, right? Like when people were during 2020, the number of searches for people saying like tea at home likely skyrocketed during that period of time. And that's when you say, okay, we hit the gas on this right now. This is when we're here. We need to be able to, and the more you do this, the more you can anticipate when these fluctuations are going to take place. But let's just even say normal fluctuations and what's going on from a seasonality perspective, knowing how do you preemptively get into that and get out of that at the right times.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it sort of goes to knowing your car as well, as we play out the analogy, right? You can feel when, okay, well, I need to put on the brake. But unless you really know your car well and you can feel the vibrations, like it's one thing to look at the metrics on the dash, but you're seeing birds moving in around the corner, so there's something going around. Like knowing that just having the right refined intuition together with the it's an equal left brain, right brain way of looking at things and being able to pounce quickly.
Totally agree. One of the other things you brought up that I appreciated too was you were talking about having the right people on the team, and that being pivotal in this and being able to be an agile company. And it reminded me of something that Jason Lemkin said. He's a big influence in the SaaS space as well. But he said something along the lines, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the only thing worse than a team that's too lean is a team that's not lean enough. And so how did you hinted at this a little bit, but getting the right people on board, you can't always change everybody to adopt what the heart, the head, heart, and hustle. You can't always make everybody. They either are or aren't, to a certain degree, going to espouse those values in their own personal lives and work lives. So those who aren't, how do you handle that?
Yeah, a really good question. And we'll continue to work through that for forever. It's interesting in our environment. Our revenue per employee has gone up 3 to 4 times in the last 5 years or so, and which part of the problem is we had too many people. We were not lean enough. back in the
Sure.
day, and had a certain sort of work culture which was very recreational and leisurely. And we've evolved that to being very growth oriented. In most cases, there's just a natural selection. People opt out, and
Sure.
it's just not the culture that they want to be able to work with, and that's 100% okay.
Yep.
If I were to do things differently, then I would have taken a hit right at the beginning and eliminated or replaced the people who were not great culture fits right away. Take the hit early and rebuild, have a solid reset. What we did at that point was more evolutionary, and it would have been easier to do it all at once. As it would have been difficult, but in general, it would have been easier. And then the ongoing piece, there's just hard decisions that you need to make, and it's people who don't fit the culture and don't fit what you really need, and it's not just your technical abilities. I would more than I would rather have someone without the technical abilities, but with the ability to learn, and someone that I'd really want to be in the foxhole with, to be able to sort of work through things, as opposed to having an expert who just doesn't care. And in those cases, then it's not a question of if, but when and how. And you just need to evolve them out. Someone said to me, someone who's not engaged has already quit. They just haven't quit yet. They haven't formalized their quitting. And so you're not going to get value out of that individual. And nothing is so difficult that you can't learn that skill. I'm replaceable. You're replaceable. Everybody on our team, your team probably as well, is replaceable. So it's not rooted in an ego. And if that ego is not the right fit, you need to get rid of that person.
That's very well said. I've heard it said, we implemented EOS traction over the past maybe about 2 years ago now. And I've heard it said, hire slow and fire fast. Yep. You're pulling it up. There you go. It's a great book. And hire, what is it? Hire slow, fire fast. If I said it wrong, but it's that idea where, that one wrong fit can absolutely destroy things. And we did have to fire somebody I know maybe about 2 years ago. And I remember that being one of those things where it was hard, but it was ultimately the overall morale of everybody else went up as a result of that. And this person was a great, wonderful person, just wasn't the right fit. And it's amazing to see how that can be a benefit to the team to make sure that you're refining it.
Yeah, I heard something this week. It was really interesting. It's like when you seat people around a high performer, everybody's performance goes up by 15%. And when you seat people around a low performer, everybody's performance goes down 30%.
Wow.
So
again,
there's all kinds of facts that we need to perhaps work through on that one. But the notion that rising tides float all boats, as it were, from a performance perspective, it makes sense, and it's very important to get the right people for sure.
Yeah. Speaking of people, I want to transition a little bit then into who is Darren Marshall. I like to get into personal side of you as well. We talked a little bit about what do you fear. Is there a different answer that you would give besides the fear of failure? Is that your biggest fear?
Yeah, it's interesting. A few years ago, I got into cycling, road cycling. And one of the things that I like to do is to sort of set crazy big goals that are a little audacious and then work really hard to reach them.
Love it.
And so last year, I decided, actually 2 years ago, I decided that last year I was going to do this cycling race called the Haute Route through the Dolomites in Italy. 5 days, 100 kilometers a day, but 10,000 feet of climbing a day. Over 5 days. So
It's aggressive.
I worked my tail off for a year to get into shape to be able to not only to finish and to not embarrass myself. And it was great. It's having goals like that, I think, are real for me. Are really important. And I look at for me, the real core motivation through that was, I am not going to be the guy who doesn't finish. I am not going to be the guy, puking my guts out on the side of the road. I am not going to be the guy who, leaves halfway through because, he didn't do the work to be able to get it done. It's also taught me that being physically fit certainly helps me deal with stress in a much better way, and it helps to get rid of the frustrations and anger, and helps me to think through things. All of those things. So it's helpful.
Well, that's great, because that's literally the next question I was going to ask, which is, how do you deal with the stress of the job? There's been so many ups and downs in the market lately, and it sounds like you've had a lot of significant ups, but it's still likely a lot of stress. Do you have routines, or, what is your way of handling the stress of what you do?
Yeah, so exercise is one. Sleep is another. I'm an 8 hour a night guy. I need 8 hours of sleep.
Right there.
And when I wake up refreshed, then that's important. I believe in hard work, but I also play hard. And what I mean by that is vacations are important. Time away, time with my family, time with my friends. Those are important things for me. And so it's interesting. I've gotten feedback from our team that by taking appropriate vacation time, it sets a standard and allows people to breathe a little bit, to balance their families and their family needs. But when we're here to get it done. And that focus and cultural focus is really important. And it's effective. And it's getting the right balance, I guess, is the answer to your question.
Yeah. Well, it's good that you, for lack of a better word, eat your own dog food, right? Where it's that idea that it's like, okay, if this is what I say is important for you guys as a team, then I'll model this as well. And I think that's, I commend you for that. I don't do as well as that, as I should probably. I don't take as many vacations and things, and something I'm trying to work on as well. And my wife encourages me to work on more as well too. So that's good. What about any fun stories of anybody, you worked at Steinway Sons and even just Coca-Cola and all over the world. So you've likely run into some really cool people, influential, famous, inspirational. Any good stories of anybody that you met that you're like, oh, this is a fun story that I like to tell?
Yeah, it's interesting. You get more senior in bigger companies, and you do meet some interesting folks. And certainly in the arts world, there's a lot of people that I've had the pleasure of meeting. Some of them are impressive, and some of them aren't. But there's two actually people that, particularly from my professional life, that I remember in a big way. So I remember way back when I was an absolute junior woodchuck at Procter & Gamble, I was in Toronto on a Monday morning, getting a super early flight to Cincinnati, and to get to, they were using the tiny little planes to be able to make that flight, and you had to get on a bus to go to the plane, and P&G people, particularly at that time, looked a certain way.
Sure.
There was what you wore, what you looked like, all of that stuff was very, very defined. So I remember being on this bus, and I went to the back, and it was like, oh my goodness. And I get and sit down beside this guy, and he said, "Oh, you're Procter, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." and he said, "I'm John Pepper, the CEO of Procter & Gamble." And so we talked on this little bus and then on the plane and stuff, and it was really cool. Here I am, 20-something junior woodchuck, with the king. And he was just the most humble guy, and like super down to earth, was interested in who I was, what my career journey had been. And then at the end, he was like, "Hey, yeah, I'm going back to the office. You want to drive?" And you just, it's like, that's what a leader of a Fortune 50 company should be. I think I've met also a lot who are not that. Over time, but that sense of humility and authenticity, I think, was really interesting.
That's cool.
And then I remember when I worked in Thailand, our division at Coke was planning a start to sort of the new strategic planning session, and we wanted to inspire people. We had done well, and so I remember, my boss, who's the president of the division, had said, "Okay, well, what should a theme be?" And we were thinking sort of like the moonshot, and how do we, go big or go home type of thing. So we decided on this moon sort of theme, and we ended up getting Neil Armstrong to come to this kickoff meeting.
Nice.
And he's unfortunately passed at this point. But talking with him about his experience being the first man on the moon was just, again, really, he's done this amazing thing, but he was super humble about it. He was like, "Well, how were you chosen to be, the guy that put his first foot on the moon?" He says, "I was the guy closest to the door." And thinking about the technology and asking, like, it was such a humble way of being able to not only create that audacious leap into mankind, I guess, but the way he did it was just, you work hard, you do the discipline, you do what it takes. You have curiosity and bravery to be able to make it happen. And I guess those are sort of the values that I resonate with. Being curious and adventuresome, and being tenacious, but caring about people and how they come together. Those are important things, and so those people have been important to me.
Almost the epitome of head, heart, and hustle, right there. Right? Like, you gotta be smart to be an astronaut. You gotta have the heart, but there's also a hustle too. It's not for the faint of heart either. Yeah,
for sure.
Darren, this has been absolutely wonderful talking to you today. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us. If people wanted to connect with you, follow you, work with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there. Darren Marshall at smitht.com is my, or Darren at smitht.com is my email address. You can find me on LinkedIn with those coordinates. And I hope that people enjoy our products. Come check us out, and hopefully we can make your day just a little bit better.
I love it. That's awesome. Thank you again for coming out here today, Darren.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Up Arrow podcast with William Harris. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.